Daniel, look at this suit. It's cheap, it's off the rack, and it's a perfect metaphor for our life together. I'm not walking down that aisle to tie myself to a man who dreams of a promotion while I'm dreaming of a dynasty. The air in the St. Jude Cathedral turned into jagged ice. I stood there, my hands trembling as I held the ring box, a ring I had taken out a second mortgage to buy. Irene didn't even look like a bride. She was wearing a cream-colored silk power suit, her eyes already scanning the room for the exit. Behind her, 200 of New York's elite sat in stunned silence, their collective pity suffocating me more than the tight collar of my cheap tuxedo. "Irene, what are you saying?" I whispered, my voice sounding like it was being crushed. 7 years. I supported you through every degree, every failed startup. I worked 3 jobs so you could keep your status. We were supposed to start our life today. "That's just it, Daniel," she said, her voice dropping to a cold, clinical tone. "You were the ladder. But now that I'm at the top, I've realized the ladder is just wood. Viktor Sokolov offered my father a merger this morning. It saves our name. It secures my future. You're a good man, Daniel, truly. But good men don't own the skyline. Sharks do." She leaned in, her perfume, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary, filling my senses one last time. "Don't make a scene. Tell them you had a panic attack. Let me walk out of here with my dignity, and maybe I'll send you a check for the catering." She turned on her heel and began to walk. The sound of her heels clicking against the marble was like the beat of a drum counting down to my execution. I watched her back, waiting for her to stop, to laugh, to tell me it was a joke. She didn't. She walked past her father, who gave her a sharp nod of approval, and headed straight for the heavy oak doors. I stood alone on that altar. The silence was broken by a single sharp laugh from the third row. Then another. The whispers started. What did he expect? A Goldberg trying to marry a Sterling? Pure comedy. The poor guy looks like he's about to cry. I felt the world tilting. I looked at the floor, wanting the marble to open up and swallow me. I was a failure, a discarded tool, a man whose 7 years of loyalty had been traded for a stock ticker. But then the heavy doors at the back of the church didn't just open. They were slammed. Irene, who had been seconds away from freedom, froze. The guests turned. A woman was walking down the aisle. She wasn't wearing a suit, and she wasn't wearing white. She was draped in a silver mesh gown that looked like it had been forged from starlight. Her presence was so overwhelming that the murmurs died instantly. This wasn't just a guest. This was Elena Ashcroft, the reclusive queen of steel, the woman whose family had been the Sterling's greatest rivals for 3 generations. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at Irene, who had turned pale. She looked directly at me. Her heels echoed with a predatory rhythm as she reached the altar. She didn't stop in the front row. She stepped up onto the platform, standing inches away from me. She smelled of rain and power. "You're a fool, Daniel Goldberg," she said. Her voice was a low, rich velvet that vibrated in my chest. "You gave your heart to a woman who views people as depreciating assets. You spent 7 years building a pedestal for someone who wanted a throne." I couldn't speak. I could only stare at her emerald eyes. "I've been watching you for a long time," Elena continued, loud enough for every mocking guest to hear. "I know about the Thorn protocol you've been coding in the dark. I know that your useless encryption is the only thing that could make my empire invincible. I came here today to buy your company. But watching this," she glanced back at Irene, who was standing like a ghost in the aisle, "I've decided I'd rather buy your life." Elena turned to the priest, who was clutching his Bible so hard his knuckles were white. Then she looked back at me. "She wants a shark?" "I want an architect," Elena said. She reached out and took the ring box from my numb fingers. She threw the cheap gold band into the flower arrangements without a second thought and pulled a ring from her own finger, a blue diamond the size of a marble. "The guests are here. The priest is paid for. The coward has already left the building," Elena said, her eyes boring into mine. "Marry me, Daniel. Right now, in this church, using her father's flowers and her mother's champagne. Marry me, and by the time we walk out those doors, You won't just be my husband. You will be the man who holds the Sterling family's debt in the palm of his hand." The church exploded into chaos. Arthur Sterling stood up, screaming. Irene took a step forward, her face a mask of horror. "Daniel, you can't. This is insane." I looked at Irene. I saw the fear in her eyes, the realization that she had just thrown away the most valuable thing she ever owned. Then I looked at Elena. She wasn't offering me love. Not yet. She was offering me a weapon. She was offering me a way to rewrite the story so that I was no longer the victim. I reached out and took Elena Ashcroft's hand. Her skin was warm and her grip was absolute. "Proceed, Father," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "The bride has arrived." I felt the gold band of the ring I had bought for Irene hit the floor with a dull, pathetic thud. It didn't matter. The weight of the blue diamond Elena Ashcroft had just placed in my hand was heavy enough to ground me. The priest looked between us, his mouth hanging open. He looked at Arthur Sterling, who was purple with rage, and then at Irene, who was frozen in the center of the aisle like a deer in the headlights of a semi-truck. Then he looked at Elena. Everyone looked at Elena. You didn't say no to an Ashcroft. They didn't just own the city, they owned the history books. I need to verify the intent," the priest stammered, his voice echoing in the sudden cavernous silence of the cathedral. Elena didn't blink. She reached into the small silver clutch she was carrying and pulled out a folded document. She slid it onto the altar. "My legal team has already updated the marriage license with the city's digital registry. Daniel Goldberg and Elena Ashcroft. All that's missing is your blessing, Father. Unless, of course, you'd like the Ashcroft Foundation to reconsider its donation to the cathedral's restoration fund." The priest swallowed so hard I could hear it. He turned to me. "Daniel, do you take this woman?" I looked at Irene. She was shaking her head, her lips mouthing the word no. She looked small. For the first time in 7 years, she looked insignificant. I realized then that I hadn't loved a woman, I had loved a project. I had been building a pedestal for someone who was already planning to kick it out from under me. "I do," I said. My voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a declaration. Then, by the power vested in me, the priest began, skipping the pleasantries and the long-winded sermons. He spoke the words as fast as he could, as if he were trying to finish before the building collapsed from the sheer tension.
"I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride."
Elena stepped into my space. She didn't wait for me to lean in. She wrapped a hand around the back of my neck, her fingers strong and warm, and pulled me down. The kiss wasn't a performance for the crowd. It was a seal on a contract. It tasted like expensive wine and cold, hard victory. When we pulled apart, the church was no longer silent. It was a riot of whispers and gasps. We turned to face the congregation. Elena laced her fingers through mine, her grip a silent command to stand tall. "Aunt Carol, Uncle Frank," Elena called out, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. I realized then that half the elite Irene had invited were actually Ashcroft associates who had been playing along. "I hope you enjoyed the show. The reception at the Ashcroft estate starts in 20 minutes. Please, leave the Sterling flowers where they are. They smell like desperation." We began to walk down the aisle. As we passed the front row, Arthur Sterling stepped out, his face contorted. "You can't do this, Elena. This boy is a nobody. He's a parasite. You're making a mockery of our circles." Elena didn't even stop. She didn't even look at him. "Arthur, you should spend less time worrying about my husband and more time worrying about the margin call that's hitting your personal accounts in exactly 5 minutes. My husband's first act as an Ashcroft was to authorize the buyout of your primary debt. You don't work for yourself anymore. You work for us." Arthur collapsed back into his seat as if he'd been shot. Then we reached Irene. She was standing right where she had delivered her goldfish speech. She looked at our joined hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and greed. I saw the gears turning in her head. The realization that the man she had just thrown away was now the man who held her entire future in his hands. "Daniel," she whispered, reaching out a hand as if to touch my sleeve. "Wait, we need to talk. This is too fast. You're being used." She's just trying to spite my father. I stopped. I looked at the woman I had spent 7 years of my life trying to please. I looked at the ivory power suit she had chosen because it looked executive. You told me I was a ladder, Irene, I said, my voice low and steady. You said you'd reached the top and didn't need the wood anymore. You were wrong about one thing, though. I leaned in, just like she had done to me minutes ago. I wasn't the ladder. I was the foundation. And you just watched the whole house fall down. I didn't wait for her to respond. Elena and I walked through the heavy oak doors and into the bright, flashing lights of 100 cameras. A motorcade of black SUVs was waiting, sirens already chirping to clear the way. As the door of the lead car was opened for us, I looked back at the cathedral one last time. Irene was standing on the steps, her black dress whipped by the wind, looking like the very thing she was so afraid of, a regret. We slid into the back of the car. The glass was tinted, shutting out the world. The silence inside was absolute. You did well, Elena said, leaning back and crossing her legs. She was already looking at a tablet, her professional mask sliding back into place. But don't get comfortable, Daniel. The Sterlings were the easy part. Viktor Sokolov is currently on a private jet to New York. He thinks he's coming here to sign a merger. He's going to find out he's walking into a slaughterhouse. She handed me the tablet. Here is your new identity. Your bank accounts have been initialized. Your security clearance is active. From this moment on, Daniel Goldberg is dead. You are the chief systems architect of the Ashcroft Group. I looked at the screen. My net worth was now a number with 9 zeros behind it. But the only thing I felt was a cold, sharp focus. I don't just want to take Sokolov down, Elena, I said. I want to use my code to expose every shell company he's ever used to hide his fraud. I want him to watch from a prison cell while I dismantle his empire piece by piece. Elena looked up from the screen, a small, dangerous smile curving her lips. I think I'm going to enjoy being married to you, Daniel. The car pulled away, leaving the church and my old life in the dust. The war had just begun. The Ashcroft estate wasn't a home. It was a fortress of glass and cold ambition perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. For the first week, I didn't sleep. I spent my nights in the subterranean lab Elena had built for me, a digital sanctuary that made my old basement setup look like a toy. I looked at the mirror in my new dressing room. The man staring back was a stranger. Elena's personal tailors had spent 48 hours on me. I was now wearing a charcoal gray suit made of vicuna wool. The fabric so light it felt like armor made of smoke. My hair was trimmed sharp, my jawline looked harder, and the hollow look of a man who skipped meals to pay someone else's rent was gone. In its place was a quiet, lethal confidence. The suit looks better than the polyester, Elena's voice came from the doorway. She was wearing a silk robe, holding a file. But the eyes are what matter. You still look like you want to burn the world down, Daniel. Good. Don't lose that. I'm not Daniel anymore, remember? I said, adjusting my cuffs. The platinum watch on my wrist hummed with a subtle haptic feedback. My own code, integrated into the Ashcroft security network. I'm the architect. Tonight is the Sterling Sokolov pre-merger gala, she said, sliding the file onto the table. Arthur Sterling thinks he's celebrating the salvation of his company. Irene thinks she's debuting as the future Mrs. Sokolov. They have no idea that 40% of their outstanding debt was moved into a Thorne Ashcroft holding company at 4 p.m. today. I picked up the file. Inside was the guest list. Irene's name was highlighted in red. Next to it was Viktor Sokolov, a man whose face looked like it was made of plastic and arrogance. Irene always told me I didn't understand high society, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I think it's time I showed her I understand the only thing that actually matters in her world, the math. The Plaza Hotel was swarming with paparazzi. When the Ashcroft motorcade pulled up, the flashing lights were blinding. Usually Elena walked these red carpets alone, the ice queen who needed no one. Tonight, the whispers were a deafening roar. Is that him? The one from the church? He looks like a different person. I stepped out of the car and reached back to take Elena's hand. As she leaned on my arm, I felt the shift in the air. The power didn't come from the car or the suit, it came from the fact that I was the only man in the world who could stand beside her without being eclipsed. We entered the ballroom. It was a sea of gold leaf, champagne towers, and people who traded in secrets. I saw Irene immediately. She was wearing a crimson dress that screamed for attention, standing next to Viktor Sokolov. She was laughing, her hand resting on Viktor's arm, playing the part of the triumphant heiress. But then, she saw us. Her glass tilted, champagne spilling onto her expensive glove. Her mouth fell open. She didn't see the goldfish in the cheap tuxedo. She saw a man who radiated more authority than the billionaire standing next to her. "Daniel?" she whispered, the name carrying across the small circle of socialites around her. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I walked past her as if she were part of the furniture, my eyes fixed on the stage where her father was preparing to make an announcement. "Mr. Ashcroft!" A group of investors swarmed us. They didn't even look at Elena. They wanted to know who the new power player was. "We heard about the systems integration. Is it true the Ashcroft Group is moving to a decentralized ledger? We're moving to a system that rewards transparency and punishes fraud," I said, my voice projecting clearly. I felt Irene moving closer, her curiosity and jealousy winning over her shock. The days of hiding debt in shell companies are over. Viktor Sokolov stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. He looked me up and down, trying to find a weakness. "You must be the rebound husband." "I'm Viktor. I usually don't talk to employees, but I'll make an exception for Elena's new toy." I turned to face him. I was half an inch taller and 10 years younger. I didn't offer my hand. "I'm not the rebound, Viktor," I said quietly. "I'm the one who just audited your Zurich accounts. You might want to check your phone. I think your creditors are trying to reach you about a certain irregularity in the Sterling merger funds." Viktor's face went pale. He fumbled for his pocket. Irene stepped between us, her face a mask of desperation. "Daniel, stop this. This is embarrassing. You're playing a game you don't understand. You married her to get back at me, but you're just going to get hurt. Elena Ashcroft uses people like you for breakfast." I finally looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the heavy makeup. I saw the girl who had traded 7 years of loyalty for a man who was currently losing his mind over a bank notification. "You're right about one thing, Irene," I said, leaning in so only she could hear. "Elena does use people, but she uses them to build things. You used me to hide from the fact that you have nothing to offer the world but a name that's currently trending toward zero." I straightened my jacket and looked at Elena. "Shall we, Mrs. Ashcroft? I believe the first course is being served, and I'd hate to miss the look on Arthur's face when he realizes who's sitting in his reserved seats." As we walked toward the head table, the seats Irene had personally assigned to her family, I felt her gaze burning into my back. She had wanted a king. She'd wanted power. She'd wanted a man who owned the skyline. She got exactly what she wanted. It just wasn't the man she was standing next to. The following morning, the Sterling family's world didn't just crack, it began to dissolve. My code, a silent predator I had named the Raven, had been nesting in their servers for years, originally built to protect them. Now it was systematically flagging every creative accounting move Arthur Sterling had ever made. By noon, the Ashcroft boardroom was silent as a tomb. I sat at the head of the obsidian table, the city skyline stretching out behind me like a conquered map. Elena stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching as the elevator lights indicated a visitor. "He's here," she said, her voice devoid of pity. "And he's alone. Viktor Sokolov refused to come. Apparently he's busy trying to move his yacht to a non-extradition port." The doors opened, and Arthur Sterling walked in. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in a single night. His suit was expensive, but it hung off his frame. He didn't see me at first. The high-backed chair and the midday glare kept my face in the shadows. He walked straight toward Elena. "Elena, please," Arthur rasped, his pride finally shattered. "The bank called in the bridge loans. Someone leaked the internal ledgers to the SEC. If the Ashcroft Group doesn't buy out our debt today, Sterling Global will be delisted by Monday. My daughter, Irene, she has nothing left. I know, Arthur, Elena said, her voice like a velvet hammer. But I'm not the one you need to convince. I've turned over all distressed asset decisions to my chief systems architect. He's the one who discovered your irregularities. Arthur turned toward the chair. I slowly rotated it to face him. I didn't say a word. I just leaned forward into the light, my fingers laced together, watching the recognition hit him like a physical blow. You? Arthur whispered, his knees buckling. He grabbed the edge of the table to stay upright. Daniel, this is a joke. This has to be a joke. The only joke, Arthur, was the $10,000 check you threw at my feet in the rain, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I kept it, by the way. I had it framed. It's in my lab to remind me how much a Sterling thinks a man's 7 years of life is worth. Daniel, listen to me, Arthur begged, stepping forward. I was just doing what was best for the family. You know how the world works. I'll make it up to you. I'll give you a board seat. I'll make sure Irene apologizes. She's been crying all night. She misses you. Stop, I commanded. The word echoed off the glass walls. Don't lie to me. She doesn't miss me. She misses the safety net I provided while she looked for a bigger trampoline. You're not here for your family, Arthur. You're here for your name. And I've already decided what that name is worth. I slid a single piece of paper across the table. This is the buyout offer, I said. The Ashcroft Group will assume all Sterling debt. In exchange, you will surrender all voting shares, all physical property, and the Sterling name itself. You will retire with a modest pension, equivalent to the middle management salary Irene said I'd never outgrow. Arthur looked at the paper. His hands were shaking so hard the page rattled. This is a hostile takeover. You're stripping us of everything. No, Arthur, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. This is an audit. I'm just taking back the value I built while you were busy trying to sell it. You have 1 hour to sign. After that, I'll simply let the SEC do my work for me. I walked toward the door, Elena falling in step beside me. As we reached the exit, Arthur let out a broken sob. Why are you doing this? You loved her. I stopped, but I didn't look back. I did. And I treated her like a queen. She's the one who taught me that queens don't marry peasants. She just forgot that peasants can become kings. The penthouse of the Ashcroft estate was silent, save for the low hum of the servers in my private lab. It was 2 a.m. I was staring at the final liquidation sequence for Sterling Global when the security alert flashed on my glass desk. Visitor at the North Gate, the automated voice whispered. Biometric match, Irene Sterling. I didn't move. I watched the grainy infrared feed. She was standing in the pouring rain, draped in a trench coat that looked too thin for the January wind. She wasn't the shark she had claimed to be at the altar. She looked like a ghost haunting the gates of a world she had intentionally walked away from. Let her up, I said into the intercom. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened directly into the living area. Irene stepped out, shivering, her hair plastered to her face. She looked around the room. The hand-carved marble, the original Picassos on the walls, the view of a city that was now legally mine. And for a second, the old greed flared in her eyes. But it was quickly replaced by a desperate, hollow smile. Daniel, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go. Victor. He's gone. He took the last of my personal accounts and fled to Dubai. The banks are seizing the house tomorrow morning. I stood by the window, my back to her. I know. I signed the seizure order at 6 p.m. I heard her gasp. She walked toward me, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood. You don't mean that. You're just hurt. I know I was cruel at the church, Daniel, but I was scared. My father put so much pressure on me. I thought I was saving us. She reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to touch the sleeve of my silk robe. 7 years, Daniel. You can't tell me that all of that is gone because of one mistake. We can start over. I'll leave the Sterling name behind. We can take Elena's money and go somewhere else. You don't have to be her puppet. I finally turned to face her. The look in her eyes was one I knew well. It was the look she used when she wanted me to stay up all night finishing her homework or her projects. It was the look of a predator trying to convince its prey that the teeth don't hurt. "You think I'm a puppet, Irene?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Elena didn't give me this life. She gave me the platform. I built the rest. Every dollar that left your father's account today was moved by my hand. Every luxury you're about to lose is because I decided you didn't deserve to keep things you didn't earn." "But I love you," she cried, the tears finally flowing. "I realized it the moment I saw you with her. I was jealous. I was wrong. Please just give me one more chance." Before I could respond, a light clicked on in the hallway. Elena walked into the room. She wasn't wearing a robe. She was in a sharp, black evening gown, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She held a glass of vintage wine, her expression as unreadable as a frozen lake. "Irene," Elena said, her voice cutting through the air like a razor, "I see you found the goldfish. Is he everything you remembered, or does the vicuna suit make him a bit harder to swallow?" Irene scrambled to her feet, wiping her eyes, trying to regain some shred of the sterling dignity. "This is between me and my husband, Elena." "He isn't your husband," Elena reminded her, stepping close enough that Irene had to shrink back. "He's mine. He belongs to a woman who saw his value when he was wearing a polyester suit. You only saw his value when it was reflected in my bank account." Elena turned to me, her eyes softening just a fraction, the only sign of the partnership we had forged. "Daniel, the security team is waiting to escort her out. Unless, of course, you'd like to keep her. I suppose we could always use a new junior coder. I hear she's very good at following orders." I looked at Irene. She looked at me, a flicker of hope in her eyes. She actually thought I might say yes. She thought she still had power over me. "No," I said. I walked over to the desk and picked up a small, familiar object. It was the $10,000 check her father had thrown at me. I hadn't framed it. I had just kept it to see if it would ever be useful. I held it out to her. "Take it, Irene," I said. "It's the price of 7 years. It's what your father thought I was worth. Now it's all you're worth. Use it to find a hotel, because by sunrise the name Sterling won't even be enough to get you a table at a diner." Irene stared at the check, her face contorting with a mix of rage and humiliation. She snatched it from my hand, her nails scratching my palm, and turned toward the elevator. "You'll regret this, Daniel," she screamed as the doors began to close. "You're nothing without an Ashcroft. You're still just a loser in a fancy suit." The doors hissed shut, cutting off her voice. The silence returned, heavier than before. Elena walked over and stood beside me, looking out at the city. "You handled that well," she said quietly. "Most men would have wavered." "I'm not most men anymore," I replied. I looked at my hand. The small scratch from her nail was already fading. "I'm the man you married, and I think it's time we finished the job. Viktor Sokolov is landing in an hour. Let's go meet him at the terminal." Elena smiled, a real dangerous smile. "The predator finally has his teeth." The private airfield was a wind-whipped stretch of asphalt tucked away from the prying eyes of the main terminal. At 3:30 a.m., the only thing cutting through the darkness was the strobe light of Viktor Sokolov's Gulfstream as it taxied toward the Ashcroft hangar. I stood on the tarmac, the collar of my wool overcoat turned up against the biting cold. Beside me, Elena looked like a statue carved from obsidian. We weren't here to welcome a partner. We were here to perform an autopsy on a living career. "He thinks he's here to sign the final merger papers," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper over the whine of the jet engines. "He thinks he's about to walk away with the last of the Sterling assets and a clean slate." "He's walking into a cage," I replied. I felt the weight of the encrypted drive in my pocket, the one containing every wire transfer, every offshore shell, and every fake invoice Victor had used to build his hollow empire. My code hadn't just found his secrets, it had mapped his DNA. The stairs of the jet lowered, and Victor stepped out. He looked disheveled, his expensive Italian suit wrinkled from the flight, his eyes bloodshot. When he saw us standing there, he tried to summon his usual mask of arrogance, but it slipped the moment his feet hit the ground. "Elena, what is this?" he shouted, squinting against the floodlights. "A welcome party at 3 in the morning. And why is your assistant here? I stepped forward into the light. The assistant he had mocked at the gala was gone. I let the power of the Ashcroft name and my own cold fury radiate from me. The assistant is busy, Victor, I said, my voice cutting through the wind. I'm the chairman of the board for the company that now owns your debt. And unfortunately for you, I'm a very demanding creditor. Victor stopped dead. He looked at Elena, then back at me. What are you talking about? I have a signed agreement with Arthur Sterling. The merger is legal. It was legal, Elena corrected him, stepping up beside me. Until my husband discovered that the collateral you used to back the merger doesn't exist. Those oil fields in Kazakhstan, they're dry holes, Victor. And the holding company in the Caymans? It's a ghost. You didn't come here to save the Sterlings. You came here to strip them bare to pay off your Russian creditors. Victor's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He reached for his phone, but I was already ahead of him. Don't bother, I said. Your accounts were frozen 60 seconds after your wheels touched the ground. You have no money, no jet, and no friends left in this city. You're not a shark, Victor. You're a parasite that ran out of blood. You can't do this, Victor hissed, his voice cracking. I'll sue you. I'll ruin both of you. With what lawyers? I asked. The ones who haven't been paid in 3 weeks? Or the ones who are currently being interviewed by the FBI regarding your money laundering? I pulled the drive from my pocket and held it up. Every transaction, every lie, it's all here. I can hand this to the federal agents waiting at the gate, or you can sign the confession and the asset forfeiture right now. Victor looked at the gate, where the faint blue and red lights of unmarked cruisers were beginning to pulse in the distance. He looked back at me, his eyes filled with a sudden, sharp hatred. Irene was right about you, he spat. You're a vengeful little man. Irene was wrong about everything, I countered. She thought you were a king. She thought I was a ladder. Now she's broke, and you're headed to a federal penitentiary. I'd say my math was a lot better than hers. Victor slumped. The fight left him all at once. He took the pen Elena offered and signed the documents on the hood of our car, his hand shaking so much the signature was barely legible. As the feds moved in to take him into custody, Elena leaned into me, her shoulder brushing mine. One more to go, Daniel. The boardroom. The final meeting of Sterling Global. It's not Sterling Global anymore, I said, watching them lead Victor away. As of 10 minutes ago, I officially renamed the holding company. Tomorrow, we walk into that building and show Arthur and Irene the new sign on the door. And what's the new name? Elena asked. I looked up at the cold, early morning stars. The Goldberg Group. I want them to see my name every time they look at the skyline they thought I wasn't good enough to touch. The Sterling Global headquarters was a monument to old money. Mahogany walls, oil paintings of ancestors who had never worked a day in their lives, and a heavy, suffocating sense of unearned importance. I walked through the lobby, my heels clicking on the marble with a sound like a ticking clock. This time, the security guards didn't ask for my ID. They didn't tell me to wait in the lobby. They stood at attention and opened the private elevator. Beside me, Elena was a vision of lethal elegance in a charcoal power suit. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone was a death sentence for the company's current leadership. When the elevator doors opened on the 50th floor, the atmosphere was frantic. Assistants were shredding documents, and board members were whispering in hushed, panicked tones. I walked straight toward the grand boardroom. I pushed the double doors open. Arthur Sterling was at the head of the table, his head in his hands. Irene was standing by the window, her back to the room, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee. They both looked up as we entered. "Daniel," Irene gasped. She looked at my suit, then at Elena, and finally at the black leather briefcase I set on the table. "What are you doing here? This is a private board meeting. Security." "The security is on my payroll now, Irene," I said, pulling a stack of legal documents from the case. "And as for this being a private meeting, you're right, it is. Which is why I'm asking all of you to leave." I slid a document toward Arthur. "This is the final share registry. As of 9 a.m. this morning, the Goldberg Ashcroft Group has acquired 51% of Sterling Global's voting stock. The merger with Sokolov has been voided due to criminal fraud. Arthur, you are no longer the chairman. Irene, your consultancy position is terminated effective immediately. Arthur stared at the paper as if it were an alien artifact. You can't do this. This company has been in my family for 4 generations. And you managed to bankrupt it in 1, I countered. I leaned over the table, my shadow falling across his face. You told me I was a goldfish. You told me I was lucky to be in your house. But the truth is, you were lucky I was there to keep your servers running. Now that I've stopped protecting you, you've realized you don't even know how to open your own vault. Irene stepped forward, her eyes welling with tears. Daniel, please, you're being cruel. My father is an old man. This company is his life. If you take this, he has nothing. He has exactly what he thought I was worth, I said. I pulled a small white envelope from my pocket and tossed it onto the mahogany surface. There's a check for $10,000 in there, Arthur. It's the same one you gave me. I haven't cashed it. Use it to buy a moving truck. You have 2 hours to clear your offices. Where am I supposed to go? Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. I hear there's a lovely studio apartment in Queens, I said. Near the subway. It's adequate, as Irene would say. I turned to the rest of the board members. They were staring at me with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. These were men who had ignored me for 7 years, who had talked over me at dinners, who had laughed when Irene walked out of the church. The rest of you have a choice, I announced. You can resign now and keep your severance packages, or you can stay and work under the new regime. But let me be clear, the Goldberg Group does not tolerate legacy hires. If you aren't producing, you're out. One by one, they stood up and shuffled out of the room, leaving only Arthur, Irene, Elena, and me. Irene looked at me, and for a second, the mask of the victim slipped. Her face twisted with a bitter, ugly rage. You think you've won? You're just Elena's pet. You traded one woman's shadow for another's. You'll never be a real Goldberg, Daniel. You're just a name on a piece of paper. Elena stepped forward then, her hand coming to rest firmly on my shoulder. You're wrong, Irene. He isn't in my shadow. He's the one who turned the lights on. And as for the name, the Goldberg Group is already outperforming the Ashcroft Holdings in the tech sector. I didn't marry him to save him. I married him to conquer the world with him. I looked at the window. The reflection of the new sign was being hoisted onto the building across the street. Goldberg. Get out, Irene, I said, my voice cold and final, and take your father with you. You have a lot of adequate years ahead of you to think about the ladder you tried to break. As they walked out, Arthur leaning heavily on Irene's arm, I didn't feel the rush of joy I expected. I just felt a deep, quiet peace. The math was finally balanced. I sat down in the chairman's chair and looked at Elena. Ready to start the real work? I asked. She smiled and opened her laptop. I thought you'd never ask. The days following the takeover were a whirlwind of cold efficiency. The sterling name didn't just fade, it was surgically removed from the city's lexicon. I spent 18 hours a day in the Goldberg Group's new headquarters, rebuilding the broken infrastructure Arthur had neglected. Elena was a constant, sharp presence at my side. Our marriage, which had started as a tactical maneuver, had evolved into a seamless machine. We didn't need to discuss our moves. We moved like two halves of a single brain. But while the business world was settling into the new reality, the ghosts of my past were becoming desperate. I was leaving the office late on a Tuesday, the streets of Manhattan, slick with a freezing drizzle, when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar in the parking garage. It was Irene. She wasn't wearing silk or wool anymore. She was in a hooded sweatshirt, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. "Daniel, wait," she croaked. She didn't have the check I'd given her. She didn't have anything. "I have nothing to say to you, Irene," I said, my hand on the door of my car. I knew back then that if things ever went south, your family would try to use my work as a weapon. I wrote a remote self-destruct command into the hardware. It was waiting for a signal that only my heartbeat-synced phone could provide. Irene stared at the melted lump of metal, her last hope dissolving in a puddle of rainwater. You planned this?" she whispered. 3 years ago? You were planning to destroy us even then. No, I corrected her. I was planning to protect myself. There's a difference. I loved you, Irene, but I wasn't blind. I saw the way your father looked at me. I saw the way you looked at bigger bank accounts. I just hoped I'd never have to use the fail-safe. I got into the car and rolled down the window. Go home, Irene, or what's left of it. The police are going to be looking for that drive. When they find out it's gone, they'll probably leave you alone. But if I see you near this building again, I won't be so lenient. As I pulled away, I watched her in the rearview mirror, a small, dark shape standing alone in a vast concrete garage. She had tried to play the game one last time, and she had lost to a man who had written the rules. I arrived home to find Elena waiting on the balcony, 2 glasses of whiskey poured. Did she have it? Elena asked, handed me a glass. She had the ghost of it, I said, taking a sip. It's gone now. The last thread to the Sterlings is officially cut. Elena leaned against the railing, the city lights reflecting in her emerald eyes. Then there's only one thing left to do. The city council is meeting tomorrow to approve the new Goldberg-Ashcroft development project. Once that's signed, we own the skyline, Daniel. For real this time. I looked out at the towers, the glowing icons of power and greed. I wasn't the boy who counted pennies anymore. I was the architect of a new world. Let's make sure they don't have any reason to say no, I said. The meeting with the city council was not a debate. It was a coronation. As the final gavel struck, the Goldberg-Ashcroft Group was granted the rights to the Apex project, a multi-billion-dollar skyscraper that would become the tallest point in New York. I stood at the podium, the camera flashes a constant white noise. I wasn't the man stuttering in a church vestry anymore. I spoke with the cadence of a man who moved markets with a whisper. When I walked out of the hall, the lobbyists and politicians parted like the Red Sea. It's done, Elena said as we reached the sidewalk. The winter air was crisp, and for the first time it didn't feel cold. It felt clean. The skyline is ours, Daniel. What now? I have one last stop to make, I told her. Go ahead to the celebration. I'll meet you at the estate. Elena looked at me, her eyes soft with an understanding that transcended our contract. She nodded and stepped into the limousine. I watched her pull away, the woman who had gambled her legacy on a man the world had discarded. She had won her bet, and in the process, I had found a partner I actually respected. I hailed a taxi, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the city one last time as a passenger. I gave the driver the address of the St. Jude Cathedral. The church was empty, the heavy scent of incense and old stone hanging in the air. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing against the same marble where I had been humiliated 6 months ago. I stood at the altar. I looked down at the spot where Irene had told me I was a ladder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cheap gold ring I had bought with a second mortgage, the one Elena had tossed into the flowers. I had found it later that day, a small reminder of a version of myself that was now extinct. You're late for the wedding, Daniel. I turned. Irene was sitting in the very back row, the shadows nearly swallowing her. She looked thin, her clothes worn. She wasn't angry anymore, she just looked hollow. I'm not here for a wedding, Irene, I said, walking slowly toward her. I lost the apartment, she said, staring at the crucifix at the front of the room. The check you gave me, my father took most of it to pay off a private debt I didn't know about. I'm working at a diner in Jersey. I take the bus 2 hours each way. You made your choice, I said. I know, she whispered. She finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. I see your name everywhere. Every time I look across the water, I see Goldberg in lights. I thought if I came here to the place where I broke it, maybe I could understand how I missed it. How I didn't see who you really were. You didn't miss anything, I said, standing before her. I was exactly who I said I was. I was a man who would have given you the world. You just didn't think I had the right to own it. You wanted the crown without the work, and the king without the character. I held out the cheap gold ring. Take this, I said. Sell it. It won't get you a kingdom, but it'll get you a few months of rent. Consider it the final payout for the ladder you used. She looked at the ring, then at me. She didn't reach for it. Do you love her, Elena? I respect her, I replied. And in my world, Irene, that's a lot more powerful than the kind of love you were offering. I set the ring on the pew beside her and walked away. I didn't look back when I heard her start to cry. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I felt the finality of a closed loop. The system was now stable. I walked out of the cathedral and into the dusk. A car was waiting for me, not a taxi, but a sleek, silent electric sedan from the Goldberg Group fleet. As we drove over the Brooklyn Bridge, I looked out at the New York skyline. The lights were flickering on, thousands of tiny sparks in the dark. Right in the center, the Ashcroft Goldberg spire glowed a brilliant, steady blue. My phone buzzed. A message from Elena. The architects are waiting for your approval on the floor 90 layouts. Come home, Daniel. We have work to do. I leaned back against the leather seat and watched the city go by. I had been erased, betrayed, and discarded. I had been a nobody in a cheap suit. But as the car accelerated toward the future, I realized that Irene was wrong about one thing. I wasn't a shark, and I wasn't a goldfish. I was the one who built the ocean. Thank you for watching the complete journey of Daniel Goldberg. If you enjoyed this ultimate revenge story, make sure to check out our other videos where the lowly husband turns the tables on the elite. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a comeback.